colons do not just introduce lists. This is probably the #1 punctuation misconception among students I've tutored. I have 4 simple rules for you to make colons easy on the digital SAT. And we're actually going to start with rule 0, which is colons must come after an independent clause. An independent clause being something that can be a sentence all by itself. And to demonstrate this, let's actually use an example using rule number 1, which is the rule you're probably most familiar with. Rule 1 is colons can introduce a list. So an example of this might be, I have 3 pets, a dog, a cat, and a monkey. This works because I have 3 pets can be a sentence on its own. It acts as an independent clause, right? But if we have my favorite foods are beets, lettuce, and s'mores, this is not okay because we do not have a full independent clause. We can't say my favorite foods are and then just end with a period, right? So this is an incorrect use of a colon. We would not want this. I'm just going to leave this in red here to show you that this is not going to work. Moving on to rule number 2, colons can give an example. And I'll give you an example of colons giving an example. We'll say, my daughter is very sweet. She brings me home flowers every day. So here we have my daughter is sweet. This is a statement and I'm backing it up with an example of something she does that's sweet. She brings me home flowers every day. And I also want to check to make sure this is a full independent clause. And yeah, we could say my daughter is very sweet and that's a full sentence by itself, right? You know what? I'm going to stick this under rule 0. So that's an example. Rule 3 is that colons can resolve a cliffhanger. And let me give you an example of this. Let's say I said, we all had the same thought in that moment. If I say we all had the same thought in that moment, you're probably wondering, what was that thought? So I can resolve that cliffhanger with a colon and say, run! Right? So a cliffhanger would be something that leaves you hanging, right? You want to know what's going to happen next. So if I say we all had the same thought in that moment, you want to know what that thought was. And then I reveal that thought was run. And this actually shows off a cool feature about colons. Even though they must come after an independent clause, whatever comes after a colon doesn't need to be an independent clause. In fact, in this case, it's a single word, right? So it's kind of the wild, wild west. You could really have anything from a single word to a phrase to a full sentence after a colon, but before the colon, you need to have an independent clause. Now, believe it or not, those 3 rules are going to cover the vast majority of questions that you run into. There is a 4th one that I like to throw in there just because I've seen it a few times on the old SAT. I haven't seen it on the digital SAT yet, but it is that you can use colons to introduce a quote. And you might be wondering, why would I use a colon instead of a comma? Well, it goes back to rule 0. If you have an independent clause, something like, Dad hated the play. It was the worst. So now we're quoting Dad, who said it was the worst. Dad hated the play is a full independent clause. So because of that, we want to use a colon rather than a comma. Whereas if we said something like Dad said, then we would introduce it with a comma because Dad said cannot stand alone. So that's the difference there for you. And anyway, yeah, take a look at those 4 rules. Hopefully those examples make sense to you. And I tell you what, I'll put these rules in the description of this video as well. But, I would definitely take a screenshot. This is really, really all you're going to need to know to get through every colon that you encounter on the digital SAT. Let's actually look at some questions and see what these look like in context. So now let's take a look at some sentence boundaries questions and see if we could identify which rule is being used to justify the colon, or if the colon's not the correct answer. So I like to only focus on the sentence with the underlined portion, and I like to simplify the sentence as much as possible. So for example, in the past as an introductory phrase, we can get rid of that. I see a comma and a but, which means a coordinating conjunction. So we're basically starting a new sentence at the word in. So really I could start here and say, in 2017, a team led by Laura Wyrick of the Australian Centre for Ancient DNA could even go with, Laura tried something blank. The DNA found in Neanderthals fossils, dental plaque. So Laura tried something new, sequencing the DNA found in Neanderthals fossilized dental plaque. So if we do have a colon here, let's think about what's happening. First of all, rule 0, do we have a full independent clause? Laura tried something new, period. Yes, we do. So we're good in that regard. And then, what does this sound like? If I say, Laura tried something new, I bet you're wondering what she tried. So we have a cliffhanger. So good job if you guessed that one. All right, let's look at another one. So we've got the number of jams available for tasting varied. Let's try the one with the colon first. So first of all, do we have a full independent clause? The number of jams available for tasting varied, period. Yeah, that's fine. So rule 0 is good. And then what's happening here? Some shoppers had 24 different options, others only 6. See if you can guess what's going on here. Which one of our 4 rules? So I would say this is definitely an example. We make the statement that the number of jams available varied, and then we give the example that some only had 24 while others had 6. So that's an example of how they varied. And yep, that works. So in this one, we're going to want to actually do something before we read the sentence. We're going to want to go ahead and boop the like button. Okay, for real though, let's take a look. I'm going to get rid of this first part. The innovative works of Congolese sculptor and architect Bodies Isaac Kingeles. Is that a full sentence on its own? No. So here you see how by checking rule 0, we can immediately get rid of the colon. And I guess we might as well go through and finish this. Since it's not a full sentence, obviously A is not going to work as well since that's basically a period there. And then we just have to figure out if we want a comma or not. So what's the subject of the sentence? The innovative works of Congolese sculptor and architect Bodies Isaac Kingeles is the subject, and the main verb is were. We do not want to separate the main subject and its verb, so we're going to go with C, no punctuation. Let's take a look at this next one. So we have a group of ecologists, and I'm going to simplify here. A group of ecologists examined the defensive responses of 2 varieties of the sweet potato plant. Is that a full sentence? Yes. So we're good on rule 0, and already I'm identifying what's going on. If you want to take a second, try to guess which rule is actually going to give us D as the correct answer. 2 varieties, and then they list the 2 varieties. So yeah, this is to introduce a list. All right, let's do one more here. So we have researchers studying Magnus sensation have determined why some soil-dwelling roundworms in the southern hemisphere move in the opposite direction of Earth's magnetic field when searching for food. Is that a full sentence? Does that work by itself? Yes, it does. Rule 0 is checked off. And again, I'll let you take a look. Spoiler alert, we do have a colon working correctly here, but the question is why? Which one of our rules does this follow? So I would say this is a cliffhanger. They tell us that researchers have determined why this happens. So you might be asking yourself, okay, why? Then after the colon, it resolves the cliffhanger by telling us why. And just to reiterate, I haven't found rule 4 in action, so you really don't need to worry too much about that one. But if they do start implementing it, I wanted you guys to be prepared. But that's why there's no examples of rule number 4. Now that you've mastered colons, I'd say you are all set to slay the sentence boundaries questions on the digital SAT. There's no other punctuation that... No.
What are you?